Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Pleased this week to be joined by a first-time guest on the show, Stephen Bardo, 4-year starter at the University of Illinois, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, member of the Illini's 1989 Final Four team. And this year, you'll hear him on broadcasts on Big Ten Network, Fox Sports, and for the first time, Peacock, as they're going to have Big Ten content this year for the first time. Welcome to the show, Stephen. Thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, Alex. Appreciate coming on. I follow what you guys doing. You do really good work, so I'm glad to come on.
So you recently talked to Mike Woodson for your show that you do, Bardo's Breakdown, and I'm curious, just what were your overall thoughts, feelings coming away from that conversation, just about how he feels about his team going into this season?
It appeared to me that Mike Woodson is pleased with the talent level that he has this year. He's excited about the pieces and trying to get them to come together. He's got a nice blend of some young talent coming in, some transfer talent coming in, and then also some veteran guys that are returning to the roster, like Xavier Johnson, Trey Galloway, CJ Gunn, Caleb Banks. So he's got a nice mix of guys that he's going to try to incorporate. I think that they feel they have more talent overall on the roster this year than they have in years past. But, you know, it's early. There's a lot of work to be done. But certainly the potential for Indiana to be an elite Big Ten team is certainly there.
In a normal year, you look at what they lost. Well, I didn't just say in a normal year, but maybe 5 years ago before the transfer portal became such a big deal. You'd look at what they lost, and I think it's something like 80% of their scoring, and you'd think, well, this is going to be a rebuilding year. It's not the case anymore in college basketball because you can just kind of go out and assemble a team and bring new players in. But I think fans expect that Indiana, now that Woodson's been to the tournament in his first 2 seasons, he'll get there again in the 3rd season. Do you think that's a fair expectation, kind of given how the roster's set up and what they should be able to do with all this talent in year 3?
Well, expectations are funny, Alex, as you know, because depending on whether they're fans or whether they're former players or alums, the expectations at Indiana are always going to be high because it's an elite program. It's a blue blood program. So Mike Woodson has got the fan base fired up once again, appropriately so, I think. And I think it's safe to say, and it's safe to have expectations that this could be a tournament team. When you look at Kel'el Ware, he could be a dominant big. He's that talented. Now, you know, his motor is in question, so let's see if he'll bring it every day. That'll remain to be seen. We had a situation with Mackenzie Mbako where he had the trouble off the court, but the guy has a flamethrower, Alex. He's going to be one of the best shooters in the Big Ten coming through the front door as a freshman. So very, very talented. You've got Xavier Johnson back at the point guard position, as veteran of a point guard as you're going to see in the country, let alone the Big Ten. Trey Galloway is a proven starter in this league, a proven 2-3 guy that can go get you some points, can defend, plays like his hair is on fire. The only thing that I'm concerned with is the lack of point guard depth. Gabe Cupps is a very talented freshman. But if you've got to play Gabe Cupps serious minutes because if Xavier Johnson gets in foul trouble, if there's an injury, then that's my biggest concern for Indiana. But everywhere else, 2 through 5, they've got depth, they've got some experience, and they've got some guys that can score the rock. So outside of that, the lack of depth of the point guard position, I like what Indiana is bringing into this season.
One thing I hear a lot from fans, too, is just the lack of 3-point attempts. I think they only took 10 yesterday in the exhibition opener. And you just kind of look at the roster. Miller Kopp's gone, and Tamar Bates, he had an up-and-down season last year, but he could come in like that Michigan State game at Assembly Hall and make a 3-pointer. Is that a fair concern for fans to have, just maybe the lack of proven perimeter shooters? CJ Gunn is kind of billed as somebody out of high school that can come into the game and make shots, but he shot a very poor percentage from 3 last year. You don't think of Trey Galloway or Xavier Johnson as volume 3-point guys. To me, it looks like Mackenzie Mbako is going to have to be the guy who, if you're going to have somebody make and take and make a high volume of 3-pointers, he's going to have to be that guy.
Yeah, he's going to have to lead the charge in that regard. And I think that Indiana's so talented up front. You know, Malik Renew is a guy that a lot of people around the league are looking for a breakout season with his talent, his feel for the game. And so Indiana's going to be inside out, not outside in. And it's going to look similar to what it looked like last season, I believe. The three-point shooting will just have to come in a timely fashion for Indiana. Can Xavier Johnson shoot threes? Yes, he can. If they're timely and he's in rhythm. Can Trey Galloway be effective from three-point line? Yes, he can. But again, it's going to have to come from Indiana establishing themselves in the post first and then being able to work out. But there will certainly be games where Indiana has droughts from the three, but I don't think it's a serious concern where that it can hold them back.
So I'm sure you're already kind of diving into all these Big Ten rosters as you prepare to work these games coming up pretty soon here. And I think the preseason consensus in the Big Ten is Purdue and Michigan State at the top, kind of separating themselves from everybody else. Do you see it that way? And if so, why do you feel like those two teams maybe have separated themselves as we enter the season?
I do see that, Alex, is they're the premier teams in the league. And the reason being, you know, let's start with Purdue. When you return the National Player of the Year and you really don't lose a lot, I think they lost David Jenkins and Brandon Newman, but they've got an outstanding freshman in Miles Colvin that they bring in. I'm going to miss. Is it Cam Heidi?
Yes. Yes. Yep.
It's Cam Heidi is going to be a player for them. He's emerged, very athletic wing. You still got Mason Gillis. You have Trey Kaufman-Wren who can score in the post. Caleb First played his hair off last year. You know, had a new role in terms of an energy guy, kind of playing off of Zach Edey. And then you bring back two freshmen in Braden Smith and Fletcher Laurie. They got tremendous experience last year, although be it in the tournament, what not so good experience, but it may be a motivational factor for them. So Purdue is deep. They're experienced. They can score a lot of different ways, and I think they'll be better defensively this year than they were last. For Michigan State, they only lost Joey Hauser off of their roster, and they bring back a ton of experience, and Tyson Walker, one of the best guards in the country. And then you add their trio of freshmen, or actually they brought in four freshmen, but three are going to play. Right. Jeremy Fears, McDonald's All-American, Xavier Booker, who's going to be a pro, who looked pretty good in limited minutes in the exhibition against Tennessee, and Cohen Carr is a revelation. If you have not seen him play, ladies and gentlemen, go watch highlights of Cohen Carr, because he had 4 field goals yesterday and all of them were dunks against Tennessee. And one in traffic was amazing. So Michigan State has maybe even better depth than Purdue, and they've got some pieces that are very unique. And I think that's why those two programs are kind of head and shoulders above the rest of the league.
Cohen Carr is a bit of a, I don't know what the right way to say it, a sore spot, I guess, for Indiana fans, because at one time they were heavily recruiting him. I remember interviewing him, I think the summer before he made his decision. It seemed like Indiana was one of his top schools, and for whatever reason, they decided, I think, not to kind of stop recruiting him, and now he's at Michigan State, and I think, as you said, he's going to be one of the more electrifying players, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country. We'll see how he adjusts to, obviously, there's going to be teams that are probably going to try to make him shoot from the perimeter, but if he gets in the open court, look out, because he's probably going to dunk on some people, so that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. After those two teams, to me, is where it really gets interesting, because I look at the Big Ten, and not to take anything away from Minnesota, but I think they've got a lot of work to do to kind of get their program back to where it needs to be. But everybody else, it feels like you're going to be sitting there doing these games for Big Ten Network and Peacock, and you're going to come on the broadcast and say anything can happen on a given night in the Big Ten, because when you go on the road in the Big Ten, as you know, anything can happen. And I feel like every team has a chance on each night to get a victory. But that middle of the pack is very interesting to me, with teams like Maryland, Ohio State, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, going down the line, Rutgers, Northwestern. I mean, these are all teams I think that have a chance to make the NCAA tournament entering the season. I want to start with Maryland, because they had a really good, solid year last year. Kevin Willard's first season, they bring back Jameer Young, they bring back Julian Reese, add some talented freshmen. Where do they kind of sit for you in the pecking order as you enter the season in the Big Ten?
I would put Maryland right in that next category of maybe 4 or 5 teams that you mentioned: Illinois, Ohio State, Maryland, Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah, I forgot Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin's going to be really good because they're older, and they've got AJ Storr. So they're going to be much better than they were last year. So in that grouping, I would put Maryland, Illinois, Ohio State, Wisconsin. The team that I'm reluctant to put in there that I maybe should is Northwestern. You talk about a second place finish last year, and they lose Chase Aldees, was going to be a big blow, but they also get back a guy in the name of Ryan Langborg from Princeton, who played in the Sweet 16, dropped 26 on Creighton. This guy can play. He's been injured, so I don't know his status, but Northwestern could very well be in that grouping as well of 5 to 6 teams that are right below Michigan State and Purdue.
Illinois obviously had a big win yesterday against Kansas in that exhibition game for charity there at the State Farm Center. What you've got a pretty good feel on the pulse of the fan base in Champaign. What are Illinois fans expecting out of this team? Obviously, they've got some really good pieces coming back. Terrence Shannon, to me, if there's going to be a player who comes and challenges Zach Edey for Big Ten Player of the Year, I'm looking at Terrence Shannon as a guy that can do it. I thought Dane Danger last year did some really good things, but to me, the X factor for them, and this is a guy every year before the season, along with Hoops, which covers Michigan, we like to rank the top 25 Big Ten players entering the season. And I was really high on Coleman Hawkins coming into this year. He got an NBA draft combine invite last year, which tells me that people who are projecting to the next level think that he can eventually get there. And with his size and kind of his unique skill set, he's a guy to me that has breakout potential. What just a two-parter, I guess. What's kind of the expectation from the fan base, and would you agree about Coleman Hawkins and his importance this year for Illinois to kind of reach his potential as the team?
Yeah, from the fan base perspective at Illinois, I think that the fan base is very excited because last year's Illinois squad was really young. This year's Illinois squad is really old. I mean, they got old in a hurry. Marcus Domask from SIU scored 1,600 points and is a smooth, big-bodied, strong wing. Quincy Guerrier is on his third school, started out at Syracuse, transferred to Oregon. Now he's in Illinois. A strong, rugged, kind of 4-3 hybrid guy that can shoot and get inside as well. Justin Harmon from Utah Valley, older guy, Chicago native, tough guard, can score. And then you talked about Terrence Shannon's return and Coleman Hawkins. And so you're looking at a team now that is one of the more veteran ball clubs in the Big Ten. The depth is there with Luke Goody. You mentioned Dane Danger. Ty Rogers is going to run some point. Sincere Harris is a dynamo of a defender off the bench. Illinois' got depth. They've got size. They've got scoring. They can attack you a lot of different ways. And then Coleman Hawkins, the way that he played last night was a microcosm of what he can be. He really guarded Hunter Dickinson very well. I thought he kept Hunter from going off. He kept him out of his sweet spots. And then on the offensive end, he looks a lot more sure of himself this season. I thought he was trying to play make too much for his teammates last year. He passed a lot of times when he should have shot, and he shot a lot of times when he should have passed up the ball. But you know yourself, Alex, this young man has tremendous talent at 6'10", 6'11". He can play 3 or 4 different positions. He can handle a basketball. He's a very good passer. He's an underrated defender, and he's a really good three-point shooter. So you're talking about a young man that if everything comes together for he and Terrence Shannon, Illinois could challenge Purdue and Michigan State for the top of the Big Ten.
Another team that I don't feel like is getting enough respect in the preseason, at least in the Big Ten, is Ohio State. They had obviously last year a down year, but they've got a lot of talent coming back. I don't know if you saw Zed Key, but he looks like he's kind of totally reshaped his body. Looks like a different player. He's another guy that I think he can stay healthy. He can have a big year for them. They have a really talented freshman class. And really prior to last season, Chris Holtmann has done a really good job, at least in the regular season, maybe not the tournament success that people would like, but Ohio State's been a top tier Big Ten team basically every season since he's been there. Do you foresee kind of a bounce back season for the Buckeyes this season, and what maybe are 2 or 3 keys to them for them to reach their potential as a team?
I do think Ohio State could be really, really good this year. I believe they have elite level athleticism across the board. So they're better athletically than most Big Ten teams. So that will give them an advantage. If you remember down the stretch last season, their freshman backcourt of Bruce Thornton Jr. and Roddy Gale Jr. really came on strong. And Bruce Thornton was pretty consistent all season last year as a freshman. He's going to be a premier point guard in the league. Roddy Gale Jr. is one of the best athletes in the league, and he can shoot the three. We know what he can do around the rim. He might be the second best athlete behind Cohen Carr in the Big Ten. Then you talked about the trio of very talented freshmen that they bring in. Scotty Middleton, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. He's going to probably get on the floor first based on his ability to defend. A really good two-way player. And then you bring back Felix Akpara up front. You mentioned Zed Key. And then 2 impact transfers who the Big Ten we've seen before. Evan Mahaffey at Penn State comes to Ohio State. Evan Mahaffey played 1 through 5 last year for Penn State. So he's a really versatile piece. And then Jamison Battle, one of the best scorers in the Big Ten, transfers from Minnesota to Ohio State. So Ohio State's got some size. They've got great length on the wings. They've got some really good quickness at the point guard position. So this Ohio State team is going to be a little scary for the rest of the Big Ten.
You mentioned AJ Storr, his arrival at Wisconsin. I feel like he gives them maybe a different dimension that we typically don't see on a Wisconsin team. You look at the tempo that he played at last year at St. John's. I think it was one of the fastest tempos in the country, and he's coming to a Wisconsin where it's a much more controlled style of play. But I think he gives them somebody that can go get them a bucket in the half court. How does he change maybe what Greg Gard wants to do with this team? I know they're not going to change their style of play for one guy, but to have a guy who can create a shot like maybe a Storr can and play a little bit in transition, that to me raises the ceiling for Wisconsin, because you look at what they brought back, it's a lot of the same players from last year's team. And while they did have a good year, they kind of fell short expectations getting to the NIT, obviously Final Four, but they, I think, needed to maybe mix things up a little bit. And I feel like AJ Storr could be the piece that's able to do that.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin is going to be right there in the thick of things. Whenever Greg Gard has an older, experienced team, they usually finish in the top 3 or 4 in the Big Ten. And I don't see that being any different this season. When you look at Wisconsin, they are a methodical team on offense, but what they're going to do this season, what Greg Gard told me, is they're going to press a little bit. So you're going to see a Wisconsin team press after free throws, try to get some easy buckets. They'll put AJ Storr in position on the wing to let him break guys off the bounce or get him freed up to shoot the three, because he shot 40% from 3 last year at St. John's. So Wisconsin, think about Chucky Hepburn, veteran point guard. Tyler Wall, one of the best forwards in the conference. Stephen Crowell had a 36-point game in the NIT last year against Bradley. That trifecta right there is as good as you're going to get in the Big Ten. Connor Essegian had a coming out party in his freshman year. Emerged as one of the best shooters in the conference. So you expect him to make a jump. Max Klesmit, who was an impact transfer, his leadership, according to Greg Gard, is even more improved this year because he's got that year under his belt. And so you have all these pieces. Wisconsin always develops bigs. So there'll be a big off the bench. Maybe it's Marcus Ilver this year. It could be Carter Gilmore, who got extended minutes last year due to the injury to Tyler Wall. So Wisconsin's going to be in the mix. They're not going to change their style of play, but AJ Storr gives them an athletic accent to what they're trying to do in terms of pushing the ball up the floor a little bit. They're not going to do it a ton, but they could probably pick and choose their spots with AJ on the wing, get him the ball, let him see what he can create. And so he adds some athleticism to a very veteran basketball team that's going to be very tough to beat And I'm looking forward. I've got Tennessee at Wisconsin on my first game with Peacock. That's going to be a heck of a game.
You mentioned maybe not being as high on Northwestern as some others. What kind of gives you that feeling with them going into the season? Is it more the uncertainty with Langborg? Is it the loss of Audige, or is it maybe the last time that Northwestern had a really good season and then tried to follow it up, they fell back? And I think that's a really tough job in general. I think Chris Collins, for the most part, as much as I like to have some fun with him on Twitter every once in a while criticizing the Northwestern program, I think that's a really hard job to be successful year in and year out. And for me, what they did last season, it was one of the more impressive coaching jobs in the country. Nobody expected them to be an NCAA tournament team. They outperformed expectations. And I think Chris Collins deserves a ton of credit for the job he did last year. But I'm just kind of curious why maybe you see them taking a bit of a slide back. At least that's what you kind of insinuated to earlier.
Well, when you take away Chase Audige, he was a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year, plus averaging 13 or 14 points a game. So he was a very, very dynamic two-way player, one of the better two-way players in the league. So you lose him, and then you bring back Ryan Langborg, who is a scorer. I don't know that he's as good defensively as Chase Audige was, but we'll see. And I think the thing that's going to sustain Northwestern better than what we've seen in years past is they changed from being an offensively oriented team to an elite defensive team. That's not going to change this year. So their drop off is not going to be as precipitous as it maybe was in years past because they hang their hat on the defensive end of the floor. That's not going to change. And so they're going to be very competitive. I don't know that I can see a number 2 seed, finishing second. But they Boo Buie is elite. He might be the best point guard in the conference. And so if you need somebody to carry you down the stretch, he can certainly do it. So Northwestern will be in the mix. That with Langborg's injury and the amount of offense that they're going to require from him, that's my only hesitation of not putting Northwestern in that mix of teams that's right below Michigan State and Purdue.
Michigan's another team that obviously fell short expectation-wise last year. They had two, top 15 picks on that team.
Yep.
And Hunter Dickinson didn't make the tournament. They obviously had an injury situation earlier last season with Jalen Llewellyn going down, but it just felt like those pieces maybe never came together the right way. The talent was there. That happens sometimes, right? The pieces just don't fit together, and they're a team that I look at this year. They've got some new pieces with Namari Burnett coming in and Trey Jackson from Seton Hall. You return Doug McDaniel, Terrace Reed, and obviously they added an impact transfer, which I can't ever get his name right. Olivier and Cam. I don't know the last name. I can't ever get from Tennessee.
Kamwa.
And Kamwa. There you go. Leave it to Steve.
No, I think the N is silent.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah. Olivier Kamwa.
Kamwa. Okay. Leave it to Stephen to bail me out on that one. But what are you expecting out of Michigan this year? Juwan Howard is currently not with the team as he recovers from an offseason medical procedure. So right now, Phil Martelli's running the show. It feels like Juwan had a really strong start there, and maybe it's kind of hit a bit of a skid just in terms of the direction of the program. I think it's an important year for Michigan to kind of find an identity and get some positive momentum going in the right direction. Do they have the pieces to be able to do that? And how does Juwan kind of being away from the team complicate that?
Well, let me address Juwan Howard first. And, I want to send my well wishes out because, the heart procedure that he had, I think was a little bit more serious when they went in. And so he's going to miss extended time. I don't think he's going to be back at the start of the season next week. I think it's going to be more like maybe Christmas time, maybe back end of Christmas, right before the Big Ten resumes. So we wish him a speedy recovery. In terms of Michigan, they might have done as well as anybody in the transfer portal. Namari Burnett, as you mentioned, comes in from Alabama. He's Chicagoland native, long arms, really good defensively. He can do some things on the offensive end as well. You mentioned Trey Jackson, who was a smooth, silky forward from Seton Hall, and then Olivia Kamwa from Tennessee, who really bludgeoned Duke in the tournament last season. So those guys they'll be mainstays for Michigan. And looking at the scrimmage results, Michigan beat Marquette, I believe it was yesterday, in a close scrimmage. So there's a lot of upside for that because Marquette's one of the top 5 teams in the country. So if Michigan can compete at that level, I think that they're going to be pretty good. The only thing that I'm concerned about, Doug McDaniel did a really good job last year of coming in and carrying the load as a freshman. Jalen Llewellyn, who you mentioned, is going to come back. That will give them some nice depth at the point guard position, but I don't know who they'll plug in behind Amari Burnett if he gets, if there's some foul trouble. There's some question about the depth on the wings, but Terrace Reed Jr., he wants to be one of the premier bigs in the conference. He certainly has the athleticism and the size to do so. So there's a lot of question marks, but I will tell you this: Phil Martelli, the associate head coach at Michigan, Juwan couldn't have a better person to hold down the fort while he's away than Martelli, because Phil Martelli, in my opinion, is one of the best college coaches in the business.
What did you see when you did their games last year that maybe kind of held them back as a team? Because I had them as potential favorite going into the season in the Big Ten. I actually picked Hunter Dickinson to be Big Ten Player of the Year last year. He was really good, but you look at the years that Edey and Trace Jackson Davis had, he was a little bit overshadowed, and now a lot of people have Hunter back on their preseason All-American teams at Kansas, but you don't often see a team with that type of talent maybe fall short on expectations. Was it just a bad fit with those particular pieces, or anything in particular that kind of stood out to maybe why Michigan failed to meet expectations last year?
Well, Jalen Llewellyn was slotted as a starting point guard. He goes down with the ACL. Then you bring in a freshman, and Doug McDaniel did pretty good under the circumstance, but he's a freshman, and he was playing heavy minutes. Then you had Kobe Buffkin, who was a young sophomore, I believe. I think he was 19 or something like that during the season. So he's young. Jet Howard was young, freshman. And so you got guys who you're really depending on night in, night out in an older conference in the Big Ten. And you've got freshmen who are trying to plug critical holes. And so I just think it never really meshed well together. I think Kobe Buffkin had his eye on the NBA for a large part of the season. I think Jet Howard did the same thing. And it's tough to get guys to commit totally to their teams if they're worried about what their draft status is going to be. That affects the way that they play. So I think there were a number of different factors involved last season that really had Michigan underachieving.
One last team I want to ask you about is Iowa, because I feel like every season I expect some type of backslide for them. They lose Luka Garza and Joe Wieskamp, and you wonder how are they going to replace them. All of a sudden, Keegan Murray's an All-American. Then you lose Keegan Murray, and you wonder who's going to replace him. Chris Murray. Now, this year, you look at the roster, I'm looking at Peyton Sanford as a guy who maybe a lot of people are sleeping on, but I saw what he did. The first half of his season last year wasn't very good, played really good, I think, in the game against Indiana and Iowa City, and that kind of jump-started his season. He was really good throughout the rest of the year. He's a guy that can really shoot it from the perimeter, but I look at the rest of the roster, and I kind of, Tony Perkins is another player who I like quite a bit, but I don't know that they have that star that they've had the past couple of years in terms of Luka Garza and Wieskamp and the Murray brothers. Would you agree with that? And with Iowa, to me, it also comes down to how are they going to defend? Because we know they're going to have one of the best offenses in the country. They've done it so many years in a row now under Fran McCaffrey, but are they going to be able to get stops? Because night in and night out in the Big Ten, I just don't feel like you can just try to outscore people. You also have to be able to lock people down, particularly in tough situations.
Yeah, with Iowa, I think you have to look at the Hawkeyes a little bit differently. And I'll address the defensive side of the ball. Iowa's never going to be a great defensive team. That's just not the way that they play. But what they do is they change defenses on you to keep you off balance, to force turnovers, to get easier buckets. And so Fran McCaffrey doesn't necessarily – he wants to play good defense. He wants to play timely defense. But the most important stat to consider for the Iowa Hawkeyes is defensive rebound rate. If they are rebounding defensively at a high level, Iowa's going to be tough to beat because they're going to score and they're going to put pressure on you. And so they play a different style than, you're accustomed to seeing in the Big Ten. And what that does, it gives them an advantage night in, night out, because, all right, you're used to playing Illinois, you're used to playing Indiana, Purdue, Michigan State. They're kind of half-court defensive teams, kind of gap, strong defensive teams. Iowa's going to press you. They're going to run and jump. They're going to keep you off balance. So if Iowa can defensive rebound well, that's the stat that you want to look at for the Hawkeyes. From an offensive standpoint, you talked about Peyton Sandfort. I think he's the best shooter in the Big Ten. I think Tony Perkins is crazily underrated because he torched Illinois last year for 34.
He torched Indiana too. That last game in Assembly Hall.
Yeah, so I mean, this guy is a scorer, and so he might end up being that star that Iowa has had. Also, Patrick McCaffrey had some mental health issues last year, but guys, you got to remember, this guy is almost 6'10", and he's a 2'3". He's a legitimate wing who I believe he averaged just shy of 10 points per game last season, and he had the mental health pause that he had to take, and so hopefully he's feeling better. So you got those three guys to score with anybody in the country. You bring in Ben Krikke from Valparaiso, who did a lot of damage in the Missouri Valley Conference. Valpo wasn't really good, but he held his own, a low box score. And then Ben Bronze is a transfer from Belmont. He's not a guy that you're going to throw the ball into and get a bucket, but he'll rim run. He'll protect the bucket. He's an energy active guy. And so Iowa's got a nice mix of players that they can hit you with. Josh Dix is a guy who played hurt all last season. He is a really good 6'5" guard that can play either the point or the two, and he can shoot it from the parking lot. So Iowa's going to be a typical Fran McCaffrey Iowa team that's going to be able to score the basketball, and they're going to change defenses on you.
So there's a lot of anxiety, I think, from some Big Ten fans about this change to Peacock this season, a different way of getting games this season. What can you tell just the Big Ten fans that like to watch their games about? Yeah, I know obviously you're one of the two lead analysts for games on Peacock this season. What's kind of how's it? It's not going to be any different than any other broadcast, right? You're just going to have to sign up for the streaming service and you get the game, right?
Yeah, you just have to go and download Peacock app, and you get the games as usual. It's, I want to tell our older Big Ten fans who, because on my platform, a lot of people are complaining, oh, we got to pay more money, got to pay. Well, this is what it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is where college sports is right now, and things are shifting rapidly on the media front, and this is going to be kind of the way things are moving forward. So get used to downloading apps and seeing your favorite team on these apps, because it's not really going back to the way it was. This is where we are in the sports media landscape. But I tell you what, NBC is not going to cut corners in terms of production. Mike Tirico will be calling some of the games. Terry Gannon, my old play-by-play partner back in ESPN days, my brother from another mother, will be calling a lot of games. Hopefully we'll be together on those games. But it's going to be high-quality production from NBC's side, so Big Ten fans won't be disappointed in that.
Do you have your schedule yet? Are you going to be working in Indiana? We always see you on some Indiana games every year. I expect that'll be the case again this year. Yeah,
I think I've got 4 Indiana games right now, and the schedule's changed quite a bit as we get into the season, so that'll change a little bit. But I'll have at least 4 Indiana games, and I believe 3 of them in Bloomington and 1 on the road as of now.
Oh. Okay, good stuff. Well, Stephen, we really appreciate it. I know you do a show also, Bardo's Breakdown. If you want to tell the audience a little bit about that, how they can find you on social media and interact with you there.
Yeah, I do a show on Facebook and YouTube called Bardo's Breakdown. Go to YouTube on Bardo Media, my last name, Bardo Media. And then on Facebook, you can go to Bardo's Breakdown page, and you can tune in there. And we also encourage people go to Bardo's Tribe, BARDOS TRIBE.com. That's something I'm doing this year. It's a membership site. It takes you behind the scenes in the Big Ten Conference, and I think a lot of Big Ten fans will enjoy having that opportunity.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show, Stephen. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex. Look forward to seeing you this season.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. As always, to Podcast on the Brink. If you enjoy the show, give us a rating or review on Apple Podcast or a 5-star rating on Spotify, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink.